All right. Yes, Dave made it just in time. All right.
Sweet.
So, welcome everyone to the first week of the Phoenix Book Club. So we did a book club once before, kind of here in the area with some people. We did Nan to Tetris, and I think we had 12 people that were interested in, and only 4 showed up for the first video hangout. And by weeks 2 and 3, there was only 2 of us. So we're already totally way ahead of those numbers for this book club because there's only 10 people that showed interest, and 6 of us are here for the first night. So it's a good metric. Hopefully we can keep enthusiasm going. But if people get bored, let me know, and we can find ways to try to make it more relevant or more helpful to the people in the group. But so tonight we'll start off. We'll just kind of go around the horn and introduce ourselves and kind of say what we are hoping to get out of this book club. So I guess I'll start us off. I'm Mike Reese. The main thing I'm trying to get out of this is that I've been having a lot of fun playing around with Elixir. I'm hoping to take my kind of just fun hobby and be able to actually build something substantial with it. And I don't want to have to reinvent all the tooling along the way, so I'm really trying to get a better idea of what the tooling is in Elixir and learn a lot of best practices so that when I go to build something, I'm not just reinventing the wheel every time, and hopefully I can make something that's worth making. So that's my hope. Someone else go next.
I'll go. I'm Zach. My interest in Phoenix is I want to rebuild what I built for my senior project. What that is basically a real-time, there's a hardware element that sends data over the wire, and you just want to broadcast that real-time on a website. So I originally built that using Node and Rails and Ember, like some strange combination of the three. And I thought, why not? It'd be fun to just rebuild that using Phoenix. That's it.
Well, I can go. My name is Bart, and yeah, what I'm looking to get out of this is some of the guys at my work are already using Elixir, but they aren't using Phoenix, which I'm trying to find out if that's a bad thing or a good thing, and so I'm trying to learn about it as fast as I can and hope to provide relevant feedback on some of those technology choices that they're already making.
Okay, Dave, Ari, or John.
Okay, I'll go. I'm Adi. I am probably the least experienced of everyone here, and my inspiration for joining the book club is just to expand my knowledge in general about web and web frameworks, and I'll just be basically like a listener here and seeing if things make sense at the end of this, hopefully.
Hey, John. Oh, did John drop off? John moved into a new place pretty recently, so he might still be on the struggle bus with internet service. All right. It also looks like Dave may have... Oh, there's John. John, you want to give a quick intro?
I'm John. Apparently I'm having technical difficulties. So all your voices were overlapping. I couldn't tell who was talking and who was not. Anyway, I'm John. I have very minimal knowledge of Elixir and Phoenix, but it looked pretty interesting. I'm more so just am interested in progressing in something. If I'm sitting idle or learning nothing, then that's boring. So might as well jump on something.
Cool. Your random choice was good. Dave, you want to give a quick intro?
Sure. My name's Dave Hackett. I just bought a book on Elixir programming a few months ago and started reading it, and thought that it was really fun. I agreed with Dave Thomas that it was a lot of fun to start learning that, and then watched a presentation on Phoenix and saw that the book was going to be coming out really soon, and then thought, hey, why not get that and learn about it too? So I'm just hoping to learn something new and hopefully be able to apply that knowledge in my career.
Sweet. So, I mean, it sounds so far like we have a pretty wide variety of what people are hoping to get out of it. Everything from like professional stuff and team dynamics to just pure hobbyists and kind of everything in between. So, I mean, all of us want something different out of this. Then it's probably not going to meet all those needs perfectly. But please, anyone here, speak up if the group is not serving your needs and you think we can change something to make it better, like do more examples or add more exercises to the to what we're working on instead of just plain reading. That's kind of something that's usually fun for me. But in any case, we'll start off tonight and we'll just kind of see how it goes and make decisions from there. So with that being said, this week we're covering Chapter 2. We kind of read through the intro and Chapter 1. Chapter 1, I don't know if anyone else felt this way, but it felt like a marketing pitch for why Phoenix exists. It was just kind of like, hoorah, this is all amazing and beautiful and wonderful. And so I kind of skipped over the unicorn part and said, all right, let's get down to building something and learning the guts of how it works. So we're starting with Chapter 2. If you're interested in Chapter 1, we can talk on Slack. But so Chapter 2, does anyone have any questions that kind of came up or things you noticed as you were reading through the chapter?
So I really liked how I'm still reading the chapter, didn't finish all the way, but I liked the separate concept of views and templates, all of that separation, so that I can the template separate from where the view saying here's the template to use. I don't know. I just kind of like that so that I could keep that separate in my mind.
Yeah, I still feel confused, like I don't really understand what I would put in the view different from what I would put in the controller, if that makes sense. I'm not really sure how the two fit together yet. Does anyone have like a good explanation of that so far?
Yeah, it almost reminded me of Ember, where it seems like there's kind of overlap there between what they do.
Yeah, I used another framework once a long time ago. It was a PHP framework. That was a terrible choice, but it did have separate view objects, separate from the controller objects. And at least in that one, it was kind of like if you ever needed to massage the data before presenting it, that was kind of the place that you did that. So the idea was like the controller just is in charge of retrieving all the necessary data, and any formatting or like if you need to sum things inside the context of the request or whatever, you kind of did all that in the view. So I don't know if that's what views are really used for in Phoenix or not, but that's kind of my initial suspicion. I don't know if Dave, I don't know when you were looking at the views if there's anything else you saw there.
Not really. I think one of the things that they pointed out was that they were using just like the default, what they call it, the default application view, so they weren't going to let deep until later. I think I also watched from last year's Elixir Conf. I watched kind of the big presentation, the big reveal of here's Phoenix, and from like it's pretty close to production ready, that kind of thing. And they were kind of explaining how you could keep the views separate from your templates. You could kind of bind multiple templates or separate templates and kind of have logic that was specific to how you're going to view it, not how you're going to display it. Like how are you going to I can't really explain it very well, but
What
was
if
interesting.
What if you're doing like an API response and you don't actually need a template, but you just want to return a format?
Yeah, that was one of the things that they mentioned was a.
So I did a benchmark a little while ago where I was doing some JSON stuff, Let me see if I can pull it up real quick on my GitHub. Pretty sure I don't even have the code locally on this machine right now. But I did. At the time I was just kind of experimenting with re-implementing the same the same application in a whole bunch of different frameworks. And I had a friend. I still have that friend. He didn't disappear, but he was really into Phoenix at the time, and he helped me walk through it. I don't have it right here, but I'll just share my screen for just a second. Sorry. Let's see, where is that? It should not be so hard. Oh, here we go. Yeah, I'll just share this Atom editor real quick. So if you had a controller, like API controller, and there's some sort of like use my app.endpoint controller, something like that at the top. I'm sure this is not exactly correct, but you have some sort of action here, and you can just you take in the connection and then some params, and you do some work, and then instead of normally if you don't specifically do any rendering or anything here, then it goes and tries to find the view and infer which view and template you want to use. But right here, we were doing something where it was like you pass the connector into this render function, and internally there's a direct dependency from Phoenix on a library called Poison, which is just a JSON encoder and decoder. And so then I could say something like, oh, have some sort of map object in here and just JSON encode it and just render that as the response to this connection, and it would skip all the view and template stuff and just send that right back. So kind of like Rails, if you, like in a before filter, if you just go ahead and you've already rendered something or you've already provided some sort of response, it skips the rest of your action or the rest of the filters. So you could do something very similar to that in Phoenix, at least at that time, and that was like 0.12 or something, and so I imagine it's probably still the same. Cool. Any other questions that people had or things they noticed?
So yeah, along the same lines, I was kind of curious. If Phoenix is to Rails, is there anything that would be to like Rails API where it's more suited directly for the API kind of world, where you kind of cut out some of that extra stuff that isn't needed? Do you know if that exists?
I haven't heard of anything. I mean, I think Phoenix at this point is young enough that there probably just hasn't been that level of nuance where they've kind of split projects.
Right. That's kind of been like the reason I work why they're not using it is for that reason. Like we're strictly doing an API, and the excuse that's been used as far as we're doing a very specific kind of a use case, and Phoenix is not. We don't use all the other stuff, so they pull in plug, we pull in ecto, and the bits and pieces that make sense, but we don't use the Phoenix part to stitch it all together.
Interesting. I have written like a really simple plug app, and it's like plug is like rack, and it was pretty easy just to be like, oh, just render some JSON and set the response code to 200. So maybe if all you need is like a tiny bit of database logic or something like that. I don't really know what else your API is doing, but yeah, it seems like maybe if you're not interested in templates or channels, maybe Phoenix isn't all that valuable to you, but it doesn't add much overhead. Like when I've benchmarked a plug app, just raw plug, versus a whole Phoenix app, there's like, it's like maybe a 10% difference in performance.
Yeah,
so,
it actually has the stat in chapter 1, right?
Oh yeah, they have that benchmark.
Yeah, I'm trying to remember what it said, but it was like tiny bit different. I mean, 180,000 versus 198,000, right? I mean,
yeah, so like a 10% or something like that difference. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, if it was me, I feel like I would try to just keep more in line with the community, because I just imagine there's going to be a ton of community work going on, and from what I've seen so far, it seems like Phoenix is iterating a little bit faster than Plug or Elixir. Like they're trying out a bunch of new ideas there, and then once it's stable for a few months, then they roll it back into plug. So you might end up in a case where they have a really nice, I don't know, like XSS protection or something like that in Phoenix before it's available in plug.
Right. Yeah, and that's been my primary argument for why we should use Phoenix as the community. I also like the fact that they have a folder layout where it's like, this is where stuff should live. It's just like established patterns, and I think they're going to be really familiar for Rails. Rails devs. It's going to feel more familiar than something we home grow. That's one of my main concerns.
Yeah, I think if there was something like Sinatra in the Phoenix or in the Elixir community right now, then that would be like maybe the perfect fit. But since that doesn't really exist, like you either kind of have to take a bet that you're going to invent it and try to create some community around it.
Right.
I don't know. Interesting.
I mean, in Phoenix, it looks like as far as routing it, they have a direct router, and it'll pipe through to the browser, but it also has scopes for just API or piping through the API. Is that something? What would be while we're talking about APIs and stuff? I mean, what do we think the use case for that would be? I guess I didn't really understand what they were alluding to that you could use in that router to either send it to the browser or to the API. Does it skip a lot of the other components and structure if you're going through that way? Would that solve any of your issues?
I think Zach can answer that question.
Sorry, could you repeat that? My internet was cutting out.
Sure.
Put me on the spot.
Blame it on the internet. It looks like the first point, the endpoint that gets hit goes through the router, and the router can pipe through to the browser, or it has scopes for API to pipe through directly or through the API. What are uses that you're going to use for that?
So I mean, at least from the reading and what I've seen, is it's like, and at least just looking at the code that they automatically generate for you, the browser is going to do a lot more protection stuff. And when it builds the pipeline method, like, so it calls, you take your connection struct and you just pass that through, like, to your endpoint, then your endpoint then goes and hits the, I think it's your pipeline next. And like, your pipeline is just going to be what functions you want to run on it. So for my API, I only want to just like build JSON. I don't necessarily need to, like in the example that they gave us, like protect from forgery and do all this other stuff. Like, you don't need to do that for an API, so it just cuts out all of that logic, like, that you need to do up front before you even process the request. So that's my understanding. It's just, it seems like it's more so just how you're going to set up your connection struct and what you want to do before you actually process your data, like in your controller and models and views.
Yeah, from the little bit that I read on it, I think, it is just kind of about efficiency, but it's also about sort of managing complexity. So as an example, I think like a typical Rails app, when you set up your rack middleware, everything that's in that middleware will get invoked every time. And so you kind of have this weird thing where some stuff you put into your rack middleware, and then other things you put in like before filters or around filters and things like that. Normally the reason you have this, like, oh, sometimes I'm using a before filter and sometimes I'm using a piece of middleware, usually the reason for that is that you want to be able to select which before filters run for certain requests and not run them for all requests. And that's because you can't have more than one middleware. You just need to have one middleware that gets used for every request. And so in Phoenix, like, I'll pull up, this is the example code from that they have you kind of build that hello app. And here's the router. And so, for instance, here you have like this plug right here. This accepts HTML. This is just going to reject a request if the person requesting it has said, like, I want JSON back. And you're like, oh no, these controller actions are only valid for HTML. Or checking if the user has something in their session, like if they have a flash that's outstanding And you can also see it's going to send back some special headers that say like, oh, this can't be put inside of an iframe, or you can't just trust any JavaScript tag on this page. So they're going to put a bunch of that stuff in there, and none of this stuff matters if you're just doing a JSON API call. And so, so rather than having some of this stuff be in the flow of the normal pipeline, and some of it be before filters, the way Phoenix lets you do this is to basically, you can just make pipelines of pipelines. And so this is just a way of saying like, oh, for all these requests, for any of the scopes that I pipe through the browser, this is the stuff that's going to get run in the order that it's going to get run in. And you can see that list kind of in one place. And so that's why, to me, it's partly managing the complexity of what's happening in the application, as well as kind of giving you control over that. Because in Rails, sometimes that's a big pain, because each of the different controllers that you're inheriting from can add their own filters, and they can skip filters and all that stuff, and it sometimes is really hard to figure out exactly what's going to happen in this given request. And being able to just kind of like put that in a few different templates and then choose which ones you're going to pipe through makes that a little bit more explicit, or a little bit more clear to the person maintaining the application. Sorry, did that answer your question, John? I feel like we went on for a little while.
No, I was just, yeah, that's good. It was just a very broad, general question. So
I don't know if anyone else had thoughts on pipelines.
That was great. Thanks.
So does anyone else have another question?
This is maybe an observation. So when you were showing that code for the pipeline, so because those are function definitions, like for the pipeline function, and it's just matching, like if it finds pipeline for browser or pipeline for API. And so this is more an Elixir thing, but I love that pattern matching ability that Elixir has. I think it's just fantastic to be able to. Sorry, there's fly buzz around my face. I think it's just really neat that Elixir has that ability to like define out, hey, here's my functions, and I want it to match when the parameters are like 1, 2, 3, and do this, and when then it's like 1, 2, 5, do something else. You know, just being able to match, I think, is a really powerful concept inside of Elixir, and I think it really, I think there's some very, just getting started, I see some very practical applications that can be inside Phoenix, even though I'm just like touching the iceberg right now. So I'm really excited about that.
Yeah. Has anyone used that yet, like in a specific Phoenix way, used pattern matching? Right. Let's see, actually, I'll see if I have a good example of this. So I built something for the Ruby community locally here so we could play games of tic-tac-toe against each other. And I don't really know what I'm doing, but I'm doing it in Elixir and Phoenix just because I'm weird. I love to cause myself pain, apparently. But there's one place where that did seem to come really in handy. So let's see if I can find this example I'm thinking of. Yeah. So in this little chunk of code, so this is my channel where people. So this thing is controlling a bunch of WebSockets, and when people are joining a game, this join method is getting called, and so I initially made it so that I'm like always expecting them to give me a token and a name, and then the topic kind of identifies which game they're joining. And this worked out really well. And then partway through the project, I really wanted to be able to create the idea of having somebody just observe the game, so they could pull it up in their web browser and watch the game rendered in real time, but not actually be participating, because this join logic here says like, oh, try to join the game, and if there's more than 2 people already, or if there's already 2 people in the game, it will reject you. And there's kind of a bunch of logic there about are you allowed to join this game. And I wanted to skip all that and just for observers, just be like, yeah, just put them in the channel, let them start getting game updates. And so pattern matching came in handy here because I could have this first definition of join, where like if someone's passing in just watching, then I can just skip everything else and just be like, yes, I'm approving them to be in this channel, they get game updates. And if that doesn't match, then it tries to do the version where it looks for their token and their name. And kind of having these 2 different use cases separate, to me, felt kind of simpler to look at than having like another case statement or something like that inside of my join method. Or not method. I need to get used to it. I need to stop saying method in my function. So I had one other question. Has anyone looked into plug? In the chapter, as we were reading along, and they're kind of showing you like, oh, here's your Phoenix app broken into its individual steps, and they represent it as if it was just like functions piped into each other, but they mention that that's an oversimplification. And I'm curious if anyone knows what else plug does besides just take the output of one function and call the next one. Apparently not.
Just real quick, I'm curious. I mean, when I look at, they talk about pattern matching. I mean, from my background, it just looks like function overloading. I mean, I don't know. Is it the same thing to you, or is it different? I mean, from what you see.
So yeah, it's partly like overloading, but instead of overloading based on the receiver of the message, you're overloading based on the data being sent, like the arguments to the function, right? So it's sort of like overloading, but reverse. But then pattern matching is also really useful inside of functions as well. And so like another place that I've seen it used is I tried to write like a little language tokenizer a while ago in Elixir. And one thing that was really helpful is that I could have like one method. So once I've tokenized the whole string of this fake language, I end up with this pretty like very nested data structure, and it would be incredibly crazy to try to destructure it at every point in the compilation process. And so what I did is I would call a function and pass in the huge nested structure, and this first function would pattern match just to like break down the top level structure, and then it would call with those like one level broken down data structures to the next set of functions, and those would pattern match on the next level. And so it gave me a way to kind of break up how I was accessing all that data and how I was using that data into like very distinct layers of abstraction, if that makes sense. It felt really different than the way I would try to organize the same thing in an object-oriented way. Because normally with object orientation, I would have like the data structure itself would have a bunch of helper methods that are for accessing like individual parts, or else they represent behaviors that iterate over parts of that overall data structure. And here it was, again, it was kind of this opposite idea. It's like you're overloading based on the data rather than overloading based on the implementation. And it was very different. Like, I'm not really sure if I actually love it a lot more or less, but it feels different when I'm working on it. And then also just the fact that you use pattern matching inside of methods all the time. So a lot of times I'll, I'm writing some code that like makes an API call or makes a database call. And if I don't want to worry about all the edge cases, then I just pattern match on the happy path. And then I know that if the thing that comes back from the database doesn't match that happy path, it's just going to blow up with a pattern matching error. And so it's just kind of like, I don't really know what all the edge cases are here, and I don't want to take the time to think about them. So I'm just going to choose happy path, but blow up if I'm wrong. And so that's kind of nice too. Those are the two things I've found myself using pattern matching on.
I think one of the other differences for pattern matching versus like overloading is like, so you think about like a strongly typed language or a statically typed language like Java or C#, and if you're going to overload, you're it's usually your method signature is different for each method. But in pattern overloading or pattern matching, it's the same. It's the same number of arguments, whether or not you ignore them. Like if you put an underscore, if you prefix it with an underscore, you're basically telling it that needs to be there, but I'm going to ignore it. I'm not going to handle that particular argument. And then you're actually matching on. It's matching the data that you're passing in for those arguments, as opposed to you writing a big if-else statement or case statement inside of your function to handle, well, if for function foo that takes ABC, if A is 1, I want it to do this bit of functionality. If A is 2, I want it to do this. And then inside of each of those blocks, you're going to have different logic to say if B is 2 and if B is, or else if B is 3, those sorts of things. And so instead of having that imperative logic embedded in your function, you're pulling that out to matching when you call that function, and it matches this particular signature. I want it to do this behavior. So I think that's a little bit different as well. When I think about overloading methods, I think about completely different signatures. Even though some might have the same number of arguments, the type might be different. And so, like in Java, you could have the same number of arguments, but one takes an array, and the other one takes a linked list or something like that. And so it would perform different functionality that way. But in Elixir, you could have something that always takes a number, and you could have it matching different ways based on the number that's in a particular argument spot.
So Garrett, I'm just going to catch you up real quick. The question that we're talking about is what's pattern matching? Like, how do we find ourselves using pattern matching in Elixir? And is it very similar to the idea of overloading from like an object-oriented sense? I know you've done like a little bit of Akka before, right? Does it have pattern matching in Akka?
Yeah, so it's not Akka that has pattern matching, it's Scala itself, and Akka basically gives you, when you go thinking in types, you basically have like an object or a generic any type, and then with that any type you can pattern match to see, oh, is this some case class, is this some user with a first name of this or whatever. So you can actually trying to think of the word, like unapply this class into a matchable type as opposed to, I don't know, something else. So it's very similar to how Elixir does it, where you can basically just build your cases and it'll go through one by one until it finds it. But it's like a when or a case when in Ruby, but it's just a lot more powerful.
Interesting. The other thing, I was trying to find it right now. I can't find it. I was contributing a little bit to a SQLite implementation of Elixir. And another thing that I noticed about pattern matching that I like more than overloading is we had this function which is about fetching the results from the embedded C code or the compiled in C code, and taking those and trying to represent the failure cases in a meaningful way. So we would like make 3 different calls to the C code, which were like, oh, give me all the column types that are coming back from this query, give me all the column names that are coming back from this query, and then give me a set of values for each row. And for each one of those calls to the embedded C, it could return possibly some errors or some valid data. And so there was a few cases, though, where it would return an error even though that didn't really feel like an error for the use cases we were using. So like if you did a query that had 0 columns returned as part of the result set, SQLite was, or rather the C code that was binding to SQLite library was calling that an error. And so we wanted to basically say like, oh, if it returns the error specifically like the 0 columns error, then just keep going with the rest of the function and just pretend that wasn't really an error. But just give back an empty array for the types or whatever. And one thing that was really nice is that if I was doing this in an object-oriented language and I wanted to write that, I would basically, like, the only thing I can do is run some logic and then call super. But in a pattern matching language, what I can do is say, like, oh, I want to have this really high priority rule that if this argument contains error, no columns present in the response, I can match on that and say, okay, now just recall the function, but replace this error with an empty array, and it will now go and try to check all the different cases or all the different variations of this function. It'll try them all again. So instead of only being able to call super and try and kind of just go one direction, I can just replace the thing this particular pattern was interested in, and then let all the other implementations try to handle the rest of it again. And so it gives me more ability to kind of like self-correct along the way and have a little bit more control, or a little bit more flexibility, I should say, about how the rest of the processing should happen beyond just being able to call super.
So how can I put comments in here? Because I tried the comment tracker and it wouldn't let me do GitHub as a source.
Wait, like you tried to put it in the chat?
Like straight up in the chat, it says cannot use GitHub as a source for the comment tracker thing. Or do you want me to use the inbox? Where's the chat?
Do you want to just put it in Slack?
That's the group chat.
Slack open?
Yeah. So let me show you one thing. Because Scala is actually a really interesting use case, because Scala can really illustrate the point here. What was I going to do? So yeah, here we go. So this is what we're used to looking at, right? Being able to say, oh, I want to match on this, and if it's true or true, or true or false, or whatever. But then you could have this as well, which is just a little bit up in the file. So the first example is what is something you might write in Elixir, right? Like you might say, oh, I'm going to match on a tuple of true and true, or true and false, whatever your case is, your primitive types. But Scala will actually let you do some things like in the second example, I give you some order, which is a trait, or basically a class, a parent class of limit order, market order, and whatever. And so what I do here is I just say, oh, hey, I can match on this as like a subclass. So since limit order is a subclass of order, I can then go on this type. So in a sense, both examples that we're talking about of inheritance, like they both kind of work, but they solve different purposes. Because the other thing here is, and I guess I'm not pattern matching on anything particular in this example, but limit order takes a set of arguments. And so even though limit order is an order, and I've caught this, I can also say I want to match on a limit order and I can actually, instead of writing, like, let's say the first argument is the price. So instead of saying the price of like $20, of like anything coming over, or like the variable, I can say I want to match of a market order that's $20 and put that actual number in there. And then I'll be able to say, oh, I want to make sure that this is an order type, a subclass order called market order that has a price of $20. And I can write that as code, and it will match on that. So we've gone from just checking inheritance to checking the innards of this system. So we're actually matching on the pattern that the class is, or what I've given it to match on is, if that makes sense.
That's interesting. I mean, it seems like, so you can like the only thing I can think of in Elixir that sounds like that, in terms of matching both on type and on values, is when you're rescuing exceptions or things like that. You can have the idea of like, oh, this is a specific case of this other type of exception. And I'm pretty sure you can just say like, oh, match any of these types, but if you also match a specific subtype before that, then that rule takes precedence. So that's sort of similar, but Elixir doesn't really have complex enough type system to make the matching on subtypes very common, at least not in any of the code that I've read so far.
Yeah, just in the conversation of inheritance, saying pattern matching as inheritance, I think that works as a simple case, but it doesn't cover all the cases that pattern matching gives you the ability to do. So, kind of back to the question, if I heard it right. Also, Arctic Circle totally destroyed my lemonade. They put peanut butter in here. Didn't ever think that peanut butter would go in lemonade, but thank you, Arctic Circle, for that experience.
I wasn't planning on the book club having an endorsement section, but we'll definitely add that in.
Arctic Circle, don't buy lemonade.
Unless you love peanut butter lemonade, in which case you should definitely go to Arctic Circle.
With strawberries in it. Sorry. I'll stop derailing now.
Does anyone else have questions? That's the extent of my questions. I don't have any other questions about Chapter 2. All right. The only other question that I was going to kind of bring up to the group is just I've kind of been looking ahead a little bit, but I don't know really. In this chapter, they only had us do like the very, very simple hello world kind of an app and just passing a parameter through a controller. It didn't feel like a lot of exercises. It didn't feel like a lot of actual writing code. I'm wondering if anyone wants to try to do more, any sort of like, let's try to build this as a group, or let's try to, like, when I've done a book club in the past, the most valuable part to me was to compare like my solution for this exercise versus someone else's, so I could see like, oh, I totally didn't know you could do that in pattern matching, or that's really cool how you use try catch here or whatever, so that's a lot of the value that I got out of the previous book club that I was part of, and I'm wondering if we can try to bring something like that to this group, or if people are interested in that.
Yeah, I'd be interested in doing like some sort of group project or.
I was trying to think of. I had the same thought, that some sort of group project. I was trying to think of ideas to go through. I don't think I really came to any conclusion, but I agree in this situation that it would be fun to do bigger group projects and figure out some way to start implementing some of this in a practical way.
Well, I mean, I'm not thinking of anything off the top of my head, but maybe as I read through Chapter 3, maybe they'll have some examples, and we can maybe we can just talk in Slack during this next week, and just if anyone has an idea of an exercise that all of us can try to implement, and then we can kind of just share code when we get together next week, and kind of compare different implementations of that same exercise or something like that. Just think, like in terms of what I'm hoping to learn from the group, that's I feel like I'll learn the most just by seeing what other people are doing with Elixir and with Phoenix that I just have never even thought of doing yet.
As long as it doesn't have peanut butter in it, bring it on.
So I also thought it might be, like, at least for me, beneficial since I'm still learning Elixir as well. I really like the idea of doing some exorcism exercises, and as a great way to get some like feedback from, not just anybody here, but anybody in the exorcism community that wants to look at that to kind of say, oh no, these would be like some best practices or something like that. I know they're really they're not really super complex, but they're meant to like teach you some of the language and help you get better, and so just as a thought, if anyone's interested, I think I'm going to do some of that too throughout the week.
Yeah, I did make an Utah Elixir team on exorcism, so if anyone else is interested in joining that, just ping me on the Slack group and I'll get you added to that. Or if anyone watching this is interested, then just tweet at me. I'll put my Twitter handle on this thing real quick. John was smart and did that. Let's see if that show up. Apparently not. Oh well. It's at MMMReese if anyone. Oh, there it is. That's there. Alright, so if you can tweet at me and I'll just add you to the exorcism group if anyone's interested in that. So I found the exorcism so far. I'm only like 4 or 5 exorcism problems in so far. Those were helpful just to get the kind of the basics of the language, some like pattern matching and stuff like that. But also in our Slack group, I made an exercises channel, and someone from the Go community tweeted or wrote a blog post about like here's 3 kind of concurrency specific exercises or problems, and just try to write an implementation in whatever language. And that was actually really fun. The problems were things like simulate a meal where you and 4 friends are eating tapas, and you order 5 kinds of tapas, and each of them comes with between 5 and 10 bites, and then and each person eats one bite, either like somewhere randomly between 30 seconds and 5 minutes. And so it's not like you don't have to match the exact output, but you're just trying to create kind of this asynchronous concurrent system that's going on. And they had several examples, and I found that really fun. Like I solved the same problem a few different ways, trying to use like tasks and also using like gen servers and things like that. So it seems like if you want to practice specifically concurrency specific stuff, Exorcism, at least so far, I haven't found a lot of good kind of concurrency practices, but they do have a lot of really good just like functional or language specific examples that are kind of all single threaded. Sweet. Anyone else have anything that they're interested in or want to try? All right. Well, then I think we'll wrap it up for tonight. Call it a night. Thanks everyone for coming. It was already a super fun book club for me, and more than 2 people were on the video chat, so it's like already a huge success by comparison to my previous book club experience. So I hope it's helpful to you guys, and I guess I'll just see everyone on Slack. See you guys later.
See you later.
Thanks.
Hey guys.